We are used to playing Twisted Metal on the PlayStation. That is always the first thing in your mind when you think of this series. Twisted Metal and Sweet Tooth are both Sony icons. The fact that any of these games are on PC is very unexpected, which is what we are going to be talking about today. The second and last version of Twisted Metal to be released on the platform that is not PlayStation. Well, kind of second. It's the second one we're going to be talking about, not the actual second one, because Twisted Metal 2 was also released on here, and we are going to be talking about the first game today. We already talked about the Twisted Metal 2 port on PC, how people use it for multiplayer, and the fact you are playing an earlier build of the game. It looked much better than the PS1 version, but that was the only positive thing you could really say about it. A lot of people don't even know that the first game was ported to PC. There's not much available information on the backstory or development, sadly. All I can say for certain is that this port was released in Japan just like Twisted Metal 2. This version of Twisted Metal was released in '96, a year after the PS1 version. Why Sony would greenlight a port of Twisted Metal to go overseas is baffling to me, since the artistic style and interests do not align whatsoever, especially with the first game. You're playing a cracked out fever dream of the 90s in America. Why would anyone in Japan have interest in that? Look at Crash Bandicoot in America, and then look at them in Japan. They don't look the same at all because of the cultural differences. So when it comes to actually playing this, trying to get it to work is an absolute nightmare since it's an old PC game. If you know anything about attempting to play these things, you have to jump through so many hoops just so the game will work. You'd have to use a virtual computer, have a copy of Windows 95, and set it all up through VirtualBox, VMware, or whatever program you decide to use. Even still, the game might have issues. It won't work for some reason, it will crash randomly, the sound will cut out. It's so fucking annoying. I spent about 2 hours trying to get McDonald's silly games to work to no avail.
Great choice.
That is the levels of frustration I'm talking about. Thankfully, there is a modded version of the game, so we don't need to deal with that bullshit. It's not really worth the trouble to go through all of it. Seriously, just don't bother. So thank you, My Abandonware, for having this download. The first thing you need to do is go straight to the options, because this is before normalized controller support was a thing on PC games. Playing Twisted Metal with this normal control format is absolutely unacceptable how bad it is. The only issue is, for whatever reason, the R1 and L1 buttons don't work. I'm playing with an Xbox One controller, and you can't map the bumpers, so I'm not allowed to use my machine guns or switch my weapons like I normally would. I had the left trigger to change my weapons and the right trigger to shoot them, and that was it. I got used to it after a while, but it sucks to not have the option to use every shoulder button like normal. There are no missing characters. The only interesting thing is the stats and bios are separate menus for some reason. I'm guessing just they didn't know how to optimize it on PC or some issue like that. I have no idea. But going into the game, it looks great. Exactly the same as the PS2 port. This actually feels like I'm playing a remake of Twisted Metal 1. The frame rate is so much better and does not drop, making a really smooth experience. On the PlayStation, there were so many moments where the game chugs along or has moments of slowdown, and the worst offender was definitely Suburbia. The game would have massive drops in that level if you had a lot of characters on screen, but here you can play with no issues whatsoever, making it much more enjoyable. The gameplay is also faster as well. I noticed some characters like Sweet Tooth, your special travel speed is increased. That could be a placebo since your movement speed is exactly the same going by the speedometer. Maybe it's the smooth frame rate, but shooting, driving, turning, and specials all feel more satisfying and faster to execute. There are some gameplay changes, but I wanted to touch on the functionality and graphical fidelity first, because this seriously looks really good. Maybe it's because I've been playing Twisted Metal 1 on the PlayStation so much, but the graphical increase is so much better. It makes it feel like a whole new game. The detail and maps, all the signs in the streets are more legible, everything is brighter, the skybox has more detail, and if you pay attention to the cars as they get damaged, the dents, holes, and broken spots are much more apparent and look more real compared to the PlayStation 1 version. Honestly, all of this stuff is expected. A game on the original PlayStation couldn't compare to a PC port since they are in theory more powerful. You may have noticed some of the maps during the video have been quote-unquote during different times of day. When I saw that in the menu, I shat myself because I thought, wow, there's no way you can actually change the time of day in the maps and make it day to night, but you can. Kind of. You can load into a level like Suburbia and change the slider over to nighttime, and the entire level will be darkened, giving a new atmosphere, which is actually a really clever way to mask how crappy your computer was. If you don't know anything about playing games on computers, they can't all run games at maximum settings, and this is how the developers decided to implement render distance. If you had a computer that could run this game with no issue, then you could use all three of them and pick between. But for some people, they were stuck only playing at quote-unquote nighttime because the computer couldn't run the game during the quote daytime. I do applaud applaud the creativity. Most people played this on the PS1, so looking at each level at different times of day and lighting settings is a cool concept. I just wish they put a tiny bit more effort in. Like, come on, you made the entire sky black. You couldn't have busted out Microsoft Paint and put some white dots on it and called them stars? Plenty of games did that back then. All the space games and underwater games did it, so why couldn't this? If you put the slider in the middle, the levels become cloudy, I think it's supposed to be, which is nice. The black just turns gray. So I wasn't sure if this was an earlier version of Twisted Metal 1 or not. With the second game, we all know the PC version is earlier. There are certain sections of levels that do not exist, along with other small changes. Here, I don't see any changes that scream early development. The first level is a little bit different. There are less boxes and ramps lying around. Other than that, every level is the same, aside from a few weapon locations. For example, on River Park Rumble, the homing missile under the bridge next to the landmine is now on top of the bridge. There's a couple of other drops that are not in the PS1 version or just changed around. Why? I don't know, but I guess the developers just wanted to do it, I guess. So this made me start to think this version is updated over the PS1. It makes sense because this game came out a year after in 96, but so did the PC port of Twisted 2 in 97, and that was clearly an earlier build. But the real proof of it was shown in the gameplay. When it comes to your average play, every character takes more damage to kill. Ramming is still dumb broken, but your regular missiles and specials do very little damage, and everyone becomes a bullet sponge comparatively to the PS1 version. Darkseid is absolutely ridiculous to kill because you can't ram him, and the rest of your arsenal does nothing to this guy. Some of the AI behavior is different as well. I noticed during my few playthroughs, they love to spam rear flame for some reason. The bullshit we come to know, like Outlaw spamming oil, Mr. Grimm spamming tire spikes, has been reduced heavily to them doing it only 2 or 3 times at most. It does remove some of the charm, as crazy as that sounds. When you go against Outlaw in the PS1 version, you know he'll spam oil, or Crimson Fury will spam rear missiles. It's not cheating horseshit like freeze locking you, they are simply avoidable and add some character and charm to the game. But speaking of freeze locking, I don't know what bonehead at the studio decided to make Darkseid special freeze you, but he spams it constantly. Like, sure, it does no damage, but not being able to move is a terrible feeling, and dying from it is a cheap death you probably did not deserve. It does make the character even better from the PS1 version, since his special there is actually a joke. Maybe these guys wanted to make him more powerful because he kinda sucks aside from his ram damage. It just makes no sense for the character. He's supposed to be the devil. Why is he shooting out something that freezes you? His bio even calls it white hot fire from hell. I think if they made the sperm pellet set you on fire, it would have made more sense. He's not the only character special who changed. As I mentioned before, Sweet Tooth special travels faster. I'm not sure if that was because of the smooth frame rate or a conscious choice, but it makes him so much better nonetheless, since hitting his special is so much easier. Crimson Fury is another character with a small special change. It does a little bit less damage, but it's much easier to hit since he shoots out 2 lasers instead of 1. There could be some small stat changes for specials, but those were the only ones I could notice. Besides, I wouldn't believe the dots in the stat menu anyway, since they're just lying rat shit. I was trying my best to find differences to see if some characters might take more abuse or maybe have a more powerful special, but if they exist, it's not clear to the player. None of the actual levels have changed, which to me is stupid. I feel like Suburbia could have been cut down a bit more. You still have this giant open highway where the AI drives around like an idiot while you struggle to find them in some random area far off in the distance. It could have been removed and nothing but good would have been made for the map. When you reach the final level, the dead giveaway was finally thrown into my face that this was not an earlier build because Minion is called Minion and not Mine Tank. If you have ever played the publicly available beta for the PS1 version of Twisted Metal, you will notice up to about a month before launch, Minion was still called Mine Tank, and here he is not called that. I am not sure who or why it was decided to make changes to this game. Of course I'm not opposed to it because the small changes they made benefited it for the most part. It just baffles me. This was going to a region where probably 3 people bought it. Hell, trying to find this game now in physical form is nearly impossible. I wanted to see if a person was selling it, but there are no listings anywhere. Plus, with the increase of retro game prices, this game would probably be around $20,000 US or something crazy like that. Either buy a video game where you can drive cars or buy a real one. Pick one. The only newly added thing into the PC version was the removal of passwords and the addition of the save feature. This makes the game much harder. With passwords, if you die and game over, you can use a password, spawn back in with all your lives back. When it comes to saving, that's not the case. The 3 lives is all you get. So your options are save scumming or actually trying to beat the game with the 3 lives you're given. I do prefer the saving, actually. As much as passwords have saved my ass more times than I can count, you don't want to sit there writing down or remembering passwords. Just load the game up and continue where you left off. When it came to the PC port of Twisted 2, I didn't really like it. Sure, the game is easier, the AI is not as aggressive, you have saving and loading, but the previous build bugs and problems were still apparent. I remember a lot of hit detection problems and collision issues, which is stuff you'd expect from a beta, but they just packaged a beta and sold it, which is actually kinda messed up now that I think about it. Sounds like games that released in modern times, doesn't it? Get ready for the new Twisted Metal game, guys! The PC version of Twisted Metal 1 is genuinely good though. I enjoyed my time playing this, seeing the levels with the make pretend daytime feature, the better graphics, and some of the characters being different. The smoothness and fluidity of the gameplay makes it a much better experience than the PS1 version. If I could go back, I would have played the game entirely on the PC. The only downfall is the button mapping. Not being able to use the L1 and R1 buttons can make the game more difficult to play. Not having machine guns to break boxes or cars with ease is a real pain. But if you can forgive that and look past it all, not having those buttons available, it's a great experience and I would recommend playing this 100%. If you can somehow get used to playing the game on a keyboard, then it will run flawlessly. Personally, it feels awkward attempting to play it that way, so I stuck with the controller. It is completely free as long as your PC can run it, which I do hope a modern PC can run a game from 1996. Give it a try, and I'm sure you will have a lot of fun with it if you do like Twisted Metal 1.